You're most likely aware that STAAR 2.0 will now include extended constructed response questions. But you may be wondering, what should I look for in my student answers? I'm going to go over what a student sample answer might look like. Angela here from Custom Classroom, helping make test prep simple. To look at the samples more closely, you can see them on the TEA website, where they've released sample scoring guide for different grade levels. Extended constructed response questions will be scored with a rubric similar to this one. Students can score a total of 5 points, but 3 will be based on students' organization and development of ideas. The other 2 points will come from the students' conventions. To sum it up, they are basically looking for a fully developed controlling idea or thesis, relevant text evidence from the passage, or in some cases, both passages, and word choice is clear. Then in the conventions, they are looking to see if the student has consistent, inconsistent, or little to no command over sentence structure, punctuation, capitalization, grammar, and spelling. This is much easier to see in the students' sample examples. For the students' samples, they were reading an article about NASA and astronauts. They were then asked, explain how the author develops the idea in the article that it is not easy to become a NASA astronaut. So here's an example of a student who scored 0 points. If you want to be an astronaut, it is going to be really hard to go to space. If I wanted to turn into an astronaut, I would first learn and study about it so I can know what to do or learn facts about going to space and be an astronaut. So here you can see that they do not have a controlling idea that is related to the prompt. There is no introduction or conclusion, and there's no organizational structure because there's only 2 sentences. The evidence provided is irrelevant and is not supporting any kind of controlling idea. The expression of ideas are unclear and kind of hard to gather what the student is trying to say and is not addressing the prompt. There's also a 0 here on conventions because based on the released rubrics, if students receive a 0 on their organization in the top portion of the rubric, they will automatically earn a 0 for conventions. This one is also an example of a 0. They have not launched the rocket in over 2 years, and they work for the ISS in outer space, and they went to the station, and all the stuff was flying everywhere. So here you can see there's no controlling idea based on the question, no introduction or conclusion, no organizational structure with only 1 sentence. The evidence is not relevant and does not support a controlling idea. Some of this is really them just trying to copy straight from the passage. The expression of ideas is very unclear and it's hard to follow. And so their conventions are a 0 because they got a 0 on organization and development of ideas. So here is an example of a student that scored 1 point. He is saying it hard because in paragraph 2 and 3, you see he says, is in the midst of preparing for a long mission on the ISS. We are training every day. They have to learn a lot of many different things, like different language, many types of subjects. They have to get ready for an emergency. Like in paragraph 10, it says all manners of emergencies can happen. So here the student has a controlling idea. They are addressing the question, but there's no introduction or conclusion and no organizational structure. There's only 2 sentences. The writer provides a little bit of paraphrased and quoted evidence, but it's not explained at all. And the expression it's hard to follow what they're trying to say. So here the conventions are a 0 because the student really has no command over the conventions. They have many errors in sentence structures, like run-on sentences. They're missing commas, there's wrong capitalizations, grammar mistakes, and spelling. And so given such a short response, these errors greatly impact the clarity of the student's answer in this writing. Here's another example of a 1. It does take a lot of work to be an astronaut. You need to do a lot of things that might be easy to do in gravity, but when there is none, it is very hard. As in the suit, you need to take them all off while using the bathroom, and when you are done, you have to put it all back on without no gravity. Think about it as you put on some jeans as soon as you get out of the shower and they are hard to get on. That is how it is just a bit harder, because now even and how many things you need to put on your body all at once. Getting to be an astronaut is also hard because you need to know everything and be safe if something bad happens, because it is a lot of responsibility to be an astronaut and it takes a lot of work too. You need to watch out for you and your teammates too. It is very hard to become an astronaut. You won't always get picked because there's a long line of others waiting to be one, and it is really isn't easy just to get a job like that. So here the student kind of has a controlling idea addressing the prompt, and there is a brief introduction and conclusion, but very minimal organization because it's kind of all over the place. The writer provides insufficient evidence, as most of the information is like summarized using general information and a lot of stuff that's not even talked about in the passage. And their expression of ideas is ineffective because the student's very vague and is not actually addressing anything specific from the passage. Here, conventions are a 0 because they're showing little to no command over conventions. There's quite a few run-on sentences in both paragraphs, missing apostrophes, missing capitals, and spelling errors. And these errors do impact the clarity of the student's writing. So now we move on to a 2, and I think this one's interesting because it got 2 points, but it is very short. It is hard to become an astronaut because they said it is not easy to become a NASA astronaut. In 2017, 12 people were selected for the NASA's new astronaut class. In paragraph 14, it shows the evidence. So here there is a controlling idea. They're addressing the prompt, but it's not developed super thoroughly. There is actually no introduction or conclusion present and no organizational structures because there's really only 3 sentences here. The writer attempts to provide evidence and the expression of the idea is ineffective because there's very little original writing and they're kind of trying to copy from just the passage. And here the conventions are a 1 because the student is showing just an inconsistent command for conventions. There's several errors in punctuation, missing a comma, and spelling, but the reader can still understand the writer's thoughts here. All right, here's another 2. It has been thrown at us that being an astronaut is no easy because of the training and the learning and also the pressure. Reason 1, I think that it is not easy is because of the training. Astronauts have to learn to fix and work things in 0 gravity and how to live in 0 gravity. It just seems too hard for me to think that actually have to do that. Second reason is because of the learning. So here there is a controlling idea, but it could be developed more appropriately. There is a brief introduction, but no conclusion. And really the organizational structure is not evident because they're losing focus and kind of jumping around in their ideas. There's little kind of relevant paraphrased evidence to give a little bit of support, but it's not explained. The expression of ideas is not there because the student is very vague in what they're talking about. And here the conventions is a 1 because they're just inconsistent in their conventions. There's a run-on sentence, some missing commas, capitalization, and spelling, but the reader can still understand their thoughts. All right, so now we're getting into a 3. Life really can be hard working on the International Space Station, ISS, for many reasons. One of them being that you are working for NASA specifically. NASA expects a lot from one person, and they don't want anyone being lazy or slacking off on their job. NASA is a very cool yet unique place to work. Not everyone gets to say that they work for NASA or get to say that they are an astronaut. It can even be challenging to send an application to work for NASA. It can take many months to receive an answer or even get it sent correctly. So here there is a controlling idea based on the prompt, but there's no introduction or conclusion, and their organization is minimal because it's just one single paragraph. They do attempt to provide some paraphrased evidence, but the reasons given are not enough information from the article. And the expression of the ideas is kind of ineffective because they are very vague. But the student did earn 2 points on conventions, which means that they were showing that they do have consistent command over conventions, despite just a few errors in grammar and spelling. These errors don't greatly impact the clarity of the writing. All right, here's another 3. It is not easy to be an astronaut because you have to apply to get in NASA when you train for 2 years before liftoff, and you learn all types of stuff like in the text it states, spacecraft systems, aviation, spacewalking skills, team building. And then they learn about the Russian language and you do space repairs and also underwater repairs, all sorts of stuff. And you have to learn about science and math and technology and lots more. So here there is a controlling idea based on the prompt. There's a brief introduction, but no conclusion, and the organizational structure is really limited, and they're shifting ideas very quickly throughout the paragraph. The writer provides limited quoted and paraphrased evidence that is insufficiently explained. So they're really looking for the student to explain their evidence. The expression of idea is basic because the word choice is very general. But even based on this, somehow this student scored an overall 2 points in this portion of the rubric. So I'm assuming because they had a little bit of an introduction and a little bit of evidence, even though they didn't fully develop those, they still were able to get 2 points on this part. And in this case, this student got 1 point on conventions because they were pretty inconsistent. There were several errors in punctuation, capitalization, grammar, and spelling, but yet we could still kind of get their thoughts. All right, moving on to a 4 now. The author develops the idea that it is not easy to become an astronaut by telling us how much they have to train and have a degree. In the text, it says you have to have a degree in engineering, math, and/or science, and those are not easy to get. Also in the text, it says that they have to train so much, like to speak Russian, spacewalks, astronomy, and so many other things. Also in the text, it says we have to train for 2 years. This proves it is hard to be an astronaut because of the extensive training they have to go through. So here, this student scored almost the full amount. They got 4 points because they do have a controlling idea. There is a brief introduction and conclusion, and they actually include some transition words. The writer does paraphrase some evidence, but does not explain it, so they didn't get credit for this part. Their expression of ideas is basic because they're very general, and a lot of this is due to it's very short and they don't thoroughly explain the ideas. But they did get a 2 on their conventions because they showed some consistent command of conventions. They had just a few errors in capitalization and spelling, but it did not impact the clarity of their writing. All right, here's another example of a 4. I know that the author is developing the idea that being an astronaut is not an easy job, because in the introduction, she tells you about having to be ready for all possibilities that require a lot of training, since astronauts have to be ready for anything. In Unique Lab, paragraph 5, she writes about the process to prepare for a mission, which requires the study of many subjects and experiments and requires 2 years of preparation before the mission. In Space Conditions, she mentions another difficult task astronauts have to face, which is going outside the space station to do repairs. In the section Safety First, she writes about all the training astronauts have to go through for emergencies. Lastly, in a new class, she shows us that it is hard to become an astronaut by telling us that out of 18,000 applicants, only 12 were selected. In summary, she used the details and facts about being an astronaut to inform us about how hard the job actually is. So here you can strongly see there is a controlling idea on the prompt. There is a purposeful organizational structure with an introduction and conclusion. The organization is a little bit limited because it's short, but they do use some basic transition words, so that is helpful for them to get credit. There is kind of some relevant paraphrasing of evidence, but they don't really explain it and they're kind of vague. And the expression of ideas here is also pretty basic because they're very general about what's going on. But they do get a 2 on conventions because they have a consistent command of conventions with few errors and punctuation that don't impact the clarity of their writing. All right, and on to a 5, which is the maximum number of points. Being an astronaut is not an easy task. You have to go through lots of training to get into the NASA programs. And even if you get through all the trainings, there is not a high chance that you will make it into the program. For example, in 2017, there was about 18,000 applicants for getting selected into NASA's new astronautic class. But only 12 people out of the 18,000 were selected for that class. And even after you make it into the NASA program, you have to go through harsh training before you get to your first mission. Though lots of training has to do with problems and issues you face when you're on your mission. Even a current astronaut said to himself, Arnold says that much of his training focuses on preparing for problems that might come up in space. And NASA relies on Russian spacecrafts to get the crews to and from the ISS. This is why you also have to study the Russian language, which astronauts spend long periods of time in Russian facilities. A difficult task that astronauts aboard the ISS face is going outside the station to do repairs. This is why they practice this in the buoyancy lab in Houston. It is the largest indoor pool in the world, and the conditions here are close to those in space when you dive in an astronaut spacesuit. This is why becoming an astronaut is not easy. And even after you become an astronaut, you have to go through lots of harsh training after, and this is why becoming an astronaut is a difficult process. So here you can see they have a strong controlling idea about an astronaut's job being difficult. They have an effective introduction and conclusion. The organization effectively maintains focus on the topic, and the writer uses some transition words. There are relevant quotes and paraphrased evidence that clearly explain how it supports their controlling idea. The expression of ideas are clear, and almost all the sentences contribute to the overall idea, and their word choice is more specific about the passage. They also got a 2 on conventions here because they are showing that they have consistent command of conventions with very few errors in punctuation and spelling that don't really impact the clarity of their writing. So this is an example of a 5 that's a little bit shorter. Now this 5 is an example of a longer response where students are using all the paragraphs. We are training every day in the section Mission Ready by Melanie Kettler. She explains how it can be tough to become a NASA astronaut. There are lots of steps studying and preparing to do before becoming a certified astronaut. The training is serious and you need to stay focused in order to get every step and piece of information correct. You need to work hard and try your best. The author develops the idea that it is not easy to become a NASA astronaut in many different ways, depending on the heading. One way she describes that it is not easy to become a NASA astronaut is by explaining the conditions in space and how the astronauts prepare for that. One of the most difficult tasks astronauts aboard the ISS face is going outside the space station to do repairs, paragraph 7. Soon after, the astronauts would go to a special lab in Houston to prepare. The lab provides the world's largest indoor pool where the astronauts can dive in and experience conditions similar to the conditions in space. To prepare, astronauts spend time in NASA's Neutral Buoyancy Lab in Houston. It is the world's largest indoor pool. The conditions there are so close to those in space. While diving, astronauts wear the spacesuit they would wear on a spacewalk, paragraph 8. In the picture, to me, the pool looks really deep with a pole attached to it so that the astronauts can practice their spacewalk. Another way the author develops the idea that it is not easy to become a NASA astronaut is by stating how the astronauts have to learn how to take care of their own medical issues if one occurs during their mission. Arnold says that much of his training focuses on preparing for problems that might come up in space, paragraph 10. In space, you would have to know to fix and solve different kinds of situations. Some of them may require one person, while others may require some more hands. They must know how to fix parts of the ISS. If you need stitches, it's going to be you or one of your buddies doing it for you. It seems that space is just stuff that's harder than they already are. Astronauts must relearn how to get dressed, to go to the bathroom, and take care of their living area in a weightless environment, paragraph 11. Lastly, the author also develops the idea that it's not easy to become a NASA astronaut by stating how long it takes for the classes to get done and how many classes they actually have to take. Candidates need a degree in engineering, biological science, physical science, computer science, or math, paragraph 15. As you can see, it is not that easy to become a NASA astronaut. It takes a lot of patience and effort, studying and working. Maybe one day you can become a NASA astronaut. So here's a great example of a thoroughly developed answer that scored 5 points. There's a strong controlling idea with every paragraph focusing on answering that question. There is an effective introduction and conclusion that are their own paragraphs. The organization is effectively supporting the controlling idea, and there's great transitions and focus throughout all the paragraphs. The writer provides relevant, quoted evidence that is clearly explained. The expression of ideas is clear, as almost all the sentences and phrases convey their idea toward the controlling idea. The conventions is also a 2 because they're showing consistent command of conventions with very few errors in spelling that do not impact the overall effectiveness of this writing. So if you're looking to help your students prepare more for extended constructed response, click on the link in the description for a free practice question with rubric. I hope you found this video helpful. Subscribe to my channel to get notified about new STAAR videos.